Hello and welcome to our presentation on the prosody of contrastive topics in German interviews. My name is Arndt Riester. My co-authors are Tobias Schröer and Stefan Baumann from the University of Cologne. We're very sad that we can't be in Tokyo due to the crisis. We hope very much that this situation won't last too long and that we will see many of you soon on some other occasion. In this talk, we investigate the prosodic realization of contrastive topics, or contrastive themes as they are sometimes called, in a corpus of information structurally and prosodically annotated German radio interviews. The corpus annotation, the information structure annotation, is based on the concept of questions under discussion. First off, the notion of contrastive topic, as many of you know, is a pragmatic notion. For instance, described in the seminal work by Daniel Bühring. It's a means of information structural prominence. So if the focus is the obligatory variable of every utterance, then the contrastive topic is the second variable, but it's not obligatory. It's only found in about 20% of utterances. At least in the data that we are using. Of course, there's a great deal of variation. The pragmatic purpose of contrastive topics is to break down a complex message into several sub-messages. For instance, a question like on which floor are the classrooms located can be broken down into questions about the classroom for the first grade, the classroom for the second grade, and whatever element occurs first in these sub-questions, so here the words first and second, this is our contrastive topic. Contrastive topics have also received a great deal of attention in phonetics. There's this introspective observation going back to Jackendorf that contrastive topics are marked by means of a rising pitch accent, the B accent. Sometimes people have said that the rise is preceded by a small trough, so it goes down and then up, giving rise to a so-called root contour. And so there's not much dispute that contrastive topics have this rise, and it has been confirmed in many empirical studies. There have been some very specific claims for German, for instance by Frascarelli and Hinterhölzl, who claimed in 2007 that contrastive topics are marked by an L star plus H accent, in contrast to shifted and familiar topics. And there's an in-depth empirical study by Bettina Braun, who compared the realization of contrastive and non-contrastive topics or themes, and she found that both were produced with rising accents, and the L star plus H and L plus H star accents were equally distributed in both categories. She found, however, that contrastive topics show a significantly higher and later peak and a longer duration than compared to non-contrastive topics. The problem is that on the one hand, we have this very distinctive rising pitch accent in German, and so there's not much doubt about that. However, the presence of a rising pitch accent is not a signal that there has to be a contrastive topic, since rises are found all over the place, also on non-contrastive elements, particularly in sentence initial position, as has been recently confirmed by a study by Baumann and colleagues. Another problem is that to create unambiguous data for lab experiments, so data which are clearly contrastive or clearly non-contrastive and at the same time authentic, is a rather difficult task. Our approach is therefore oriented towards corpus data. We investigate the realization of contrastive topics versus non-contrastive background expressions in a corpus of German radio interviews, the grain corpus, we take a selection of 9 interviews of 10 minutes each, in which journalists talk to politicians. We have 8 female speakers, 7 male speakers. We have 1,053 spoken utterances in total. The advantage of this corpus is that it has contains annotations at various levels, including automatic phonetic analysis, including so-called PaintE parameters, parameters describing intonation events per syllable, and we also have manual information structure annotations. So we have labels, focus, background, contrastive topic, and non-issue material based on the QUD tree method. A word on the PaintE model. PaintE is an automatic method for the analysis of F0 contours, breaking it down in 6 interpretable parameters. For instance, the steepness of the rise, the slope of the fall. In this study, we look at the B parameter, which describes the peak alignment. A value between 0 and 1 indicates that the peak of the accent falls on the accented syllable. A value greater than 1 indicates that we have a late peak. We also look at the C1 parameter, which describes the amplitude or range of the rise in hertz, so the distance between the lowest and the highest point of the curve. As for the pragmatic annotations, we make use of the QUD tree method, which is a recent discourse analytic method built on the concept of questions under discussion, described in work by Van Kuppeveld and Roberts and others. So the idea here is that in any discourse, every assertion or every elementary discourse unit is the answer to a question, the so-called question under discussion. And it is possible to reconstruct the QUDs on the basis of well-known principles from information structure theory. Once we have the QUDs, we know about the information structure of our discourse. In particular, the focus is whatever answers the QUD, and as we have seen, contrastive topics are indicators of a more elaborate discourse strategy with super questions and sub-questions. In a separate study, we could show that it is possible to annotate information structure with this method with a very decent inter-annotator agreement between 0.6 and 0.7. As for our corpus queries, we make use of the Icarus tool developed at the University of Stuttgart. Icarus is a tool for the exploration and querying of speech corpora. It's possible to formulate complex queries that involve prosodic, syntactic, semantic, pragmatic information, and to extract the results in various formats. For this study, we looked at syntactic constituents annotated for CT and the PaintE parameters on their relevant syllables. We found 83 CT items in which the contrastive topic occurred before the focus in the utterance. We also found a few cases where the order is reversed, but we put them aside. Note that contrastive topics are not confined to referring expressions. They can occur on any expression within an utterance, very much like a focus. Here is an example. So the overarching question is, how should EU representatives act in the Ukraine crisis? First, what should they do? One should stay in touch. And secondly, what should one not do? And then the answer is, so what one should not do is throw oneself at Mr. Putin. So the contrastive item here is the negative particle nicht, not, which I will briefly play.
Was man eigentlich nicht tun sollte.
For comparison, we look at non-contrastive sentence initial background constituents which carry a pitch accent. We refer to them as background constituents and not as non-contrastive topics because we're not only interested in referential expressions again. We find 85 of these sentence initial items, and you can see another example. So the Minister of Health is asked to give his opinion about the fact that his predecessor Daniel Bahr is running marathons, and the minister says, well, for that I've always admired Daniel Bahr. And we know that this is a non-contrastive statement because were it contrastive, it would convey the rather impolite implication that there are other things for which he does not admire his predecessor. This is not what is expressed here. And I will play the example again.
Also da habe ich Daniel Bahr immer für bewundert.
Hello as well from me, I'm Tobias Schröer, and I'm going to talk about our statistical analysis. First, we compared the amplitude of contrastive topics against background expressions, and we found that pitch accents on contrastive topics have a somewhat 24 Hz larger amplitude than pitch accents on background expressions. We can also see this in the box plot, where it's also visible that female speakers have a higher range, a higher amplitude on both background and contrastive topics than male speakers, which was what we expected. So in order to normalize for these speaker-specific differences, we converted the C1 parameter, which is in Hertz, to semitones, which relativizes the amplitude. And again, we found a significant difference between contrastive topics and background expressions, which is around 2 semitones. In the study of Braun, there was a later peak alignment for contrastive topics reported, which we also analyzed, but we could not find any significant difference between the peak alignment of background and contrastive topics. To conclude, our study shows some important findings. First, more in general, speech corpora that have been annotated for information structure, in this case the QED method, allow for empirical analyses of the link between pragmatics and prosody. And in our study, we can confirm the intuitive observation that contrastive topics, at least in German, are marked with a distinct rising pitch accent, which has a higher amplitude than pitch accents on backgrounded material, but no later peak alignment in contrast to Braun's findings. So our pilot study can be seen as a starting point for further investigations of information structure of annotated corpora, for example for focus material. Thank you very much for watching, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask either via email or in the comments down below.